Hi everyone, my name is Ben, and today I'm going to tell you a little about building a window jamb. So my project was demolition. Then once everything was stripped down, using the existing window and the existing framing to install the window jamb and a door jamb. And then I'm going to move forward with nailing everything together and putting on the trim. So just to put that in context a bit, I didn't build the framing myself, I didn't install the window. So this is just sort of DIY repair. But this is my first time doing this, so feel free to let me know if you have any better ideas or suggestions on how this could be easier for me in the future. So as you can see here, I have sort of a dry fit going on. This is not nailed into place, I was just sort of fitting it in. But what you want to do when you start this is strip everything down to the studs, remove any old caulking, make sure the drywall is cut flush with the studs and there's not uneven, jagged edges going around everywhere. So what you do is you would measure the width of both the top and the bottom separately and the height, left and right. And you do want to measure all the sides independently and don't just assume the opposite side is going to be the exact same dimensions. And the reason I say that is not because the height and the width tend to be different. Windows are manufactured pretty square, and as long as you're using that as a guide, it should be fine. But because the depth, definitely. The distance between the front part of the wall and the window material itself. Mine's metal in this case. But when you measure at a few different points, you may notice that either the wall is wavy, the wall is maybe just diagonal, or maybe the window is just installed crooked and is not necessarily square with the rest of the framing. So thankfully for me, the depth was maybe within a 1/4 inch everywhere around. And a 1/4 inch is manageable. So when you're measuring that depth, and definitely when you're cutting or ripping a board to satisfy that depth, if it's too wide, too thick, it'll protrude into the room and it'll create an overhang. So the goal here would be to eventually cover this up with a standard type of trim with 45-degree edges to kind of tie it in all the way around, basically like a picture frame. That's what we're doing here. We're building a big picture frame and we're putting it in the window. If you do have that overhang, you're going to have to caulk around and fill that gap between the front finished facing and the wall itself. And within a 1/16 of an inch or so, it's not a big deal. Caulk is great for that. But anything more than maybe 1/4 of an inch, then you probably didn't cut or rip the wood correctly. But if it's too skinny, then it will always be flush on the outside finished edge, but the inside of the windowsill, near the window material itself, you'll have a gap that you'll need to fill. So it's basically up to you where you want to address the gap with caulk. If you're not a good carpenter and you're not good with doing exact measurements, you'll need to decide whether you want to make up for the inconsistent cut around the perimeter, which is sort of easy to hide, or in the window itself, or between the wood and the window. Either way is acceptable, but obviously you should shoot for cutting the exact width all the way around that you need to satisfy the distance between the window and the drywall. The outside of the drywall, definitely. Don't cut it to the inside of the drywall. This is supposed to span the entire gap, so all an individual would see is the finished tied-in wood all the way around, eventually with a front-facing molding around the edge. So I used a finished pine material. It's sanded down, very smooth. The batch at Lowe's was pretty good quality, and I didn't have to worry about selecting which side I want to face. It all worked out pretty well, with the exception of a couple warped boards that I had to deal with. So obviously your height can be just chopped off with any type of saw. The length of the bottom piece All that's easy enough, but you do have to worry about the overlap. You don't just want to cut every dimension you measure. You actually have to subtract the thickness of the horizontal boards to gauge the height of the vertical boards. Then when you go to rip the board, that would be cutting it the depth-wise that you need to get into the room. You would definitely want to measure, like I said, all the way around. If it's within 1/4 inch of both sides, just cut it straight. If you do want to be really picky and you want it to be flush all the way around, then you might want to do a slight diagonal cut that will go across maybe 1/4 inch difference. I don't actually have a table saw, which is what I would recommend using for this. The table saw being, you would slide this right across and it would rip the board for you at its exact measurement. I had to build a jig. I don't know if you can see it out the window there, but it's basically a straight edge made out of plywood and old molding that I ripped out. And it provides me a guide for me to slide my handheld circular saw against to ensure a straight line is cut every time. So it was pretty easy for me to clamp this down, run my circular saw across the guide to rip them out. And that's how I was able to satisfy that depth requirement to get into the room. So once you have all of the pieces cut, I would recommend doing a dry fit like this. Don't nail it in, don't glue it in. Just set the pieces in. I would do the bottom first, stack the sides, and then put the top just across the top. And then you'll be able to see that it's possible to move the boards maybe side to side. And if you have a gap, mine's pretty tight because they installed the framing pretty tight. But if you did have vertical clearance, you would be able to shim up the window, up or down. Same with the top. And if you have warped boards that make a curve, you would be able to shim those as well to kind of see what it would look like if it was perfectly square. And that gives you a good guide to go by. If you were to just build this and then put it in without ever doing a dry fit, maybe you do have a warped board and you realize once it's straightened out, it doesn't fit anymore. So you do want to account for any bowing. You want to account for maybe after you put it in, you realize there's a nail stuck behind it that you need to move out or something like that. So my dry fit pretty well. I purposely cut the bottom and the top pieces too long, just so it would be wedged in there a bit better. And I wouldn't need any shims to go side to side. But what you do want to take note of is the clearance between the boards you put in here and the window material itself. Some people like to leave maybe 1/16 of an inch to 1/4 inch difference on purpose, a staggered difference between the wood you're putting in and the window material. That way when you caulk it, there would be a consistent seam all the way across. Well, this window is put in a bit too tight for me to do that, unless I wanted to grind down these boards, which I didn't want to do. So I'm basically taking the default thickness of this board, and I have to consistently make it level with the window across. So that will take some shimming once this is ready to install. And this, I don't know if you can see from there, but this bottom one is pretty well aligned. The side one here, I'll have to shim in different places to be able to make sure it's flush down the window. Afterwards, once this is all ready, shimming it and then caulking that seam would make it basically look like it's part of the window. So that's it for just explaining what the window jamb is like. Next I'll show you how to pull this down and nail it. Just take note of where the things need to be nailed. If you do have an overhang like mine, you can't see it from there, but I did make some pencil marks to know exactly where these boards are going to tie into each other. I'm going to lay them right here on the floor and do the nailing, so I don't have much opportunity to get all the boards mixed up, but I would recommend just labeling it top, bottom, left, right, abbreviate if you need to, just so you know which side of the board you plan on nailing. Like I said, there could be warped boards, If you did have to cut it or rip the board at a diagonal angle, it's only going to fit one way. So take note before you take it down, and then the nailing should be pretty smooth. Alright, so as you can see, I have the dry fitted boards that you just saw up in the window down on the floor. I had them labeled LR top and bottom, just to make sure I put them down in the proper configuration. One thing I would recommend though is that after you lay it out and you have it in the correct orientation, you completely flip it all upside down. The reason being is that the side you really want to be flush is the front-facing molding. You'll have that trim around the perimeter, and you don't want to have gaps at the edges where your angles are all intersecting. You'll have the 90-degree edge within the window jamb itself, but then you'll have that 45-degree angle cut on the molding that goes around. So by flipping everything, assuming you have a level floor like I do, I just installed this underlayment on top of the subfloor. That will ensure that all of the front-facing edges are lined up. And also having a good surface like this helps when you're using a nail gun too, just because you don't want to be balancing a bunch of boards around when you're using a power tool. So this is actually my first time using a nail gun. I can't believe I've gone so many years hammering by hand. So you definitely want eye protection for this. I actually haven't run the nail gun in here yet, so hearing protection might be advised. I'll give it a try a couple times, see how it goes. But definitely if you're doing nail guns all day, you would want ear protection and maybe even some hair protection. So you'll do 2 nails per corner, one at the bottom, one at the top. The nails I have are at least 1 inch long, and they'll be pretty stable enough for me to carry this assembly around without it falling apart. But by using relatively small nails, I mean they're big compared to some finishing nails, but they're small enough to where if I didn't nail it completely square, there's still enough give where if I put it up in the window, I can still shim it around and move it as I see fit. Alright, so I'm going to pop a couple nails in. I do have the joints where my nails are supposed to go traced in the board. When I had it up dry fit earlier, I traced the inside. You definitely don't want to just trace the front, especially if you're flipping it upside down like I did. By tracing the inside, you can see it from any angle, no matter how you're nailing it. Alright, here it is. So I'll swing it around. I actually have it upside down. There we go, top, bottom, LR. Freestanding frame. So I'm going to put it back in the window, do another dry fit, but I haven't decided yet whether or not I'm going to pre-attach all of the trim with the 45-degree cuts and then set it in, or if I should slide it in and shim the edges. It's up to you. You can try it both ways. Obviously, assembling it outside of the wall would allow you to prime it, paint it, do whatever you want to do, and then slide it into place. I would be more inclined to do that if this was a new construction project and I had control over all of the overhangs and things like that. If I was going to consistently do a 1/16 or 1/4 inch, anything, any gap between the wood and the window itself, I would want to make sure it was all even all the way around before I put the window in, before I do all the drywall and things like that. In my case, since the framing is old, the window is old, I'm more inclined to just put this in how it is and put the shims along the edges to make sure I kind of squish in the both sides to create flushness that I'm going to then seal with caulk. All right, as you can see, I have the constructed window jamb placed back inside of the window frame itself. So I showed you earlier where I nailed them together using the nail gun. So this is connected to itself, but it is not yet connected to the studs. And the reason I did that is, as I explained before, it's still pliable enough for you to manipulate how far it is in either direction. And I did mention shimming it out, and I literally meant taking shims like this and just shoving them in between the framing and the new wood that was recently installed. So let me open the window here just to show you what I was talking about earlier. When I was mentioning having like a 1/16 to 1/4 inch reveal, it was essentially between the window material itself and the new wood. So the shims will allow you to manipulate that reveal. What my goal is here, since I'm doing it flush, you can tell at the bottom it's relatively flush, but as I go up towards the middle, there's an overhang, and then towards the top it's flush again. So in the middle here, I'll use shims to make the wood move out towards the reveal, and then I will go around with a nail gun and pop a nail into each of the shims all the way through. The nail gun probably won't damage the wood that much, but if you do use a hammer, you'll need to make sure to smooth any dents you have out, and possibly even put some sort of putty in it before finalizing the paint. I have a straight edge here with a leveler built in, and what I've been doing is going around, not necessarily making sure it's truly level. I'm really trying to make sure it's square and plumb with the window material itself. I'm going to go ahead and tack that in here with some nail gun nails, finishing nails, just to make sure that I don't put a dent in the finished wood with a hammer. There you have it. Alright, now that the window jamb is nailed into place, properly shimmed out, I was able to determine what reveal I would like between the jamb itself and the trim. I wanted about a 1/4 inch reveal, so I built this little jig out of some scrap shims, stapled them together, just so when I slide it along the edge of the corner here on any side, I'm able to trace out a consistent reveal pattern. It doesn't really matter about how accurate this is, because regardless of the size, it'll be a consistent reveal all the way around. They do make a device, I forgot what it's called, but it's really expensive, and this was essentially free. So what I'm going to do now is trace along the lines, establish my reveal, and then I'll get to cutting it. Alright, so I started cutting the trim. You can see I went ahead and put the bottom and the right hand pieces on just so I could give some better demonstration. What you really want to do is pay attention to the corners here as well as your reveal. So I showed you, I built this little corner jig to help me draw the line, but it's also helpful to have something like this so when you're putting the nails in, you can run the jig down the side if you have trouble seeing your line. Eyeballing it is fine, but if you do want it to be consistent like I do, just having a simple spacer or some sort of angle piece to help you go around and create an even reveal. So that being said, even if your reveal is perfect, if the corners are sloppy, it's not going to be tied in very well. So if you are going to be using something, so you're not eyeballing it, you want to do it exact, only put some nails in the center, because that'll allow the edges to still be flexible enough when you put the other piece on to join it together. If there is a gap, you'll be able to bend it slightly into place. It's better to bend it a bit and have a smaller gap than it is to have a big gap in the corner that you'll have to caulk. and then you won't have that point in the corner either. So I put those two pieces in just to talk about this, but what I'm going to go ahead and do is get this piece here ready for the corner. You definitely want to do some wood glue here, just a bit. Then you can wipe out any excess later, but this will allow the corner to be pretty good. And then after you put it on and you nail it across, it's good to shove a shim behind the corner to make sure they're flush with each other. And then put a nail in sideways, just through the side up here, into the end of the corner. So the wood glue will hold it, but the nail will keep it lined up for you. So I'll go ahead and put this on. Alright, 2 nails is all that I need just to hold it in place. I did run into a bit of an issue with the evenness of these corners, so like I said, I'm going to shove a shim behind it. Let's see if I can level it out a bit. I might actually need 2 shims for this. Alright, and since I didn't put a nail within a foot or so of the edge, I'm still able to manipulate the corners a good bit. Alright, so that's all you need to do. Just make sure the corners are aligned, you have the reveal you established, and keep in mind that by placing the nails farther apart, without nailing the ends first, you can still flex the trim to follow your reveal. Like I had mentioned before, I was trying to make mine as flush as possible with the window. I wasn't necessarily using a level for to determine how straight the line is. So depending on the boards you used, they could be a bit curved, and you may want to bend the trim slightly to account for that curve. So once you get 3 out of the 4 sides up, you have the corners of the existing 2 corners tied in, all even, you have your reveal established, you even left a foot or 2 gap between the edge and the closest nail just for flexibility. Then you want to measure tip to tip, in this case, the end of the cut to the end of the next cut. I didn't explain this before, but when you're cutting these, you're typically measuring from the inside of the angle, from the short side. The reason is because it's hard to imagine where that point will be. When you drew that line for the reveal, that's only going to give you the inside dimensions. But for the last board, the last piece of trim, it's important to try to span that entire gap, even if it's not necessarily the same as the other side. You want to address that outer edge, because that's ultimately what you're seeing from across the room, is that clean outer edge with the corners tied in. So you'll see that I left the top one flexible here. And I'm going to go ahead and put this up, bring it out to my reveal, start nailing, and I'll make sure to put some wood glue in between as well. Alright, there it is. Consistent reveal, tight in corners. I'm going to put a couple more nails in for the gaps that I hadn't addressed yet, just to make sure everything's locked. Everything is glued. At the very end, before painting, the seams will be caulked, and then it'll be a finished product. Thanks for watching.